Hello, coaches. Welcome to Daily Sports Science Locker Room Podcast. We have Daniel St. Ledger back with us tonight, and Mark Doran is very welcome, lads. Conclusion of the season at the weekend saw Dublin win their 31st All-Ireland title against Kerry. The two boys have come on tonight to give us their views on how they felt the game. We'll look quickly back at some favourite moments throughout the year. Lads, very welcome. Thanks for coming on again.
Thank you, Stephen, Daniel.
Last one of the season before the madness of the club season starts, and we'll all be falling out and going mental over our club campaigns now that start in a few weeks. Mark, start with yourself. The game on Sunday probably didn't live up to the high expectations everyone felt, from a standard point of view, but certainly I would have probably called it a defender's day with the weather conditions that we had and how slippy Croke Park is. As you know yourself, having played there and coached there, it is a pitch that can be greasy at the best of times, never mind when there's been a sort of a downpour of rain. How did you see the game from where you were sitting?
Yeah, look, you probably nailed it there, hit the nail in the head with it there. Look, I didn't actually, look, there was a lot of people thought it was going to be that really a shootout. I didn't think it would been a shootout. I thought, I did think Kerry would win. I got it wrong, and even after tipping Dublin all year, just felt coming up. But I thought Dublin definitely tactically got it spot on. I thought Dublin learned a lot maybe from the Derry game when you look like. But I think Kerry got one kick pass in the first half into David Clifford's pocket, 13, the one under the Cusick stand, the one he loves. And that actually come from a Dublin turnover. I thought Dublin were really smart. They blocked that off. Even Dublin set up at the first half, probably to frustrate Kerry, where they cut the 10 and 12. That kicking channel Kerry love to get the ball into that kicking, where Dublin were just happy to drop off. And they're if you look, Conal Callan and boys, they didn't really press up into the 60 or 65. They just let the boys drop in, especially Brian Hard seemed to just drop in as that +1 in front of Clifford, and then Owen Merchant, and they're half, even Paul Mannion at times, they were happy to drop into that pockets 10 and 12. But there was even at times Brian Hard, you probably couldn't see it on TV, but you're sitting in the stand. Brian Hard was so, especially in the first half when Dublin had the ball, he was ultra keen to get to that pocket 13 where David Clifford loved receiving the ball and getting around that, and they cut it off so well. They cut it off very, very well. And then saying that at half-time, 5 minutes before the goal, you're saying Kerry's not really going well here. Dublin are probably playing the better football defensively, and they were pulling men back. You've seen how Dublin, at times, 15 men behind the ball. And to be fair, when they did turn Kerry over, they did break a serious pace. But in saying that, the goal probably, you were thinking, kick-started Kerry a wee bit, and Dublin maybe in a half-time thinking after playing, I wouldn't say so well, but definitely frustrating them and playing all the football to go in a point down. And to be fair, the Kerry then came out to 10 minutes in the second half, and I actually thought just before the goal, I thought Dublin had a wee bit flat. They did go flat because Kerry were starting to build. But then, to be fair, look, and we always hear that common trend. You hear many times from coaches, you can do all the tactics in the world and all the game plays in the world, but if you can't nail the basic skills, doing the simple things well, and look, and to be fair, it was unfortunate for Gavin White because he was actually playing very well at that time, but just a loose pass, and then all of a sudden Dublin balls in it, and you just feel, because I was as quiet as I hear Dublin Croke Park in a long time. I think that's the 4th or 5th All-Ireland final in a row, and it was so quiet for that 10-minute spell just after half time where Dublin were just finding it hard, and next thing, all of a sudden, ball in the net. And I thought it'd give Dublin serious energy. Now, to be fair, Kerry went up and got the next 3 points, but I thought it did a serious energy for Kerry. They come back from that, and I thought Dublin then gradually got the bench, started making a difference. Our bench came in. A lot of people, Jack McCaffrey, I thought Jack McCaffrey was brilliant when he came in there. I did too, Mark. I watched the Sunday game and even reading the papers, and I thought nobody really mentioned. I thought the first ball he got, he just went, and the whole place lifted. The kick pass into, I think it was John Small, where he got the left foot kick pass in front of the D.
Mark, do you not think though that there was a strategic nature in holding him back with his explosive power and his pace, particularly late in the game when a team is tired? They did the same again, Monaghan.
Yes, without a doubt. And look, to be fair, Paddy Clifford was really coming into the game strong at that time. He came in, and then I know Paddy Clifford sacked him for one. I think maybe it was Burke, and then they brought one of Spillans on, but it was just when he went, like the first run he didn't non-score, it was a ball, but every time he got the ball, there was an excitement. But even the Dublin players seemed to get a buzz where you could see the Kerry players were like, not saying they're afraid, but they just didn't want to win the ball. But and then the ball he gave in to John Small, or Paddy Small, sorry, just a left foot pass right in front of the D over the bar. But you think, and Dublin, like we always talk the years, Dublin were really this third quarter team. But in this last two games, they've shown that fourth quarter press, and they're going to outscore Kerry 7-2 in the last 10 minutes was massive. And you look at, but look, Dublin, we said about Dublin, there was probably lots of pressure on Dublin before the game. Look, Pat Gilroy came back for one reason, Stephen Cluxton came back for one reason, Paul Mannion came back for one reason, Jack McCaffrey came back, and it's worked out for them. And maybe that real experience. I know Kerry won that iron last year, but you did feel in the last 4 or 5 minutes Dublin had the experience over them. But I did think Dublin were really smart, even the way where Brian Hard in the first half, the kick outs, like the kick, like people wouldn't have seen it, but some Kerry did pray. Like people says Kerry didn't, like Kerry did press for a while, but Cluxton was that good and the Dublin movement was that good. Like Brian Hard was getting himself free every time. And to be fair, like Kerry, Dublin obviously identified, and this is nothing against Jack Barry, but obviously Brian Hard was up against Jack Barry and went, Jack Barry's not going to score. So Brian, when we don't have the ball, you're going to drop into that pog of 13 in front of, or else get in front of Clifford. And to be fair, I thought Dublin defensive in the first half done that really well. Now in the second half, David Clifford probably had 2 or 3 chances he normally would score, and and if we had a score them, it might have been a different thing. But look, I think Dublin were the better team at the end of it. They were the better team, but people says it wasn't the blockbuster we're expecting. But I thought it was fascinating, even the tackling, like the off the ball stuff that was going on, the contact. It was just at times we talked, yes, Dublin at 15 behind the ball, Kerry at 14, but for so much it was just individual battles. Like there was so much, and even there was so much needle going on after the ball. And to be fair, look, it's not half my praise referees. And I thought David Goff contributed to that. He refereed it on the edge. He let it go. I know, and the McGinley and that were saying about James McCarthy. And look, there maybe is a point in another rep, but I thought David Goff made it into that sort of game. It was fascinating. It was good. It was played in the edge, and like there's nobody left Croke Park going, that was a poor game, even though probably they were expecting a 23-21 a shootout, but it wasn't. But it was actually fast, and it just shows you the two so-called best teams, like, can, instead of a shootout, just went and played a real cagey game with each other. And look, to be fair, Dublin won it in the end.
Yeah. Daniel, just going to yourself there, Mark, touched on a lot of points, obviously, that you've probably seen yourself, like, but Mark talked about that sort of rotational sweeper where you had Brian Hard in at one stage. I noticed in the second half, sitting in the upper tier of the canal end, you could see that at one stage Kieran Kilkenny was in there. There was other times Lee Gannon was sweeping. There seemed to be a sort of a rotational basis of who was sweeping and who wasn't. But also as well, 2 questions for you. What's your thoughts on that from a player perspective? Is that player led? Is that constructed? Is that worked on? And secondly, Mark talked on your own sort of teaching colleague there, Stephen Cluxton, like on how impressive he was. I thought he was absolutely immense, Daniel. I thought his kickouts were brilliant. And obviously as well, Mark talked about the movement there. So the 2 questions I have for you is, how much of the rotational sweeper has been coached in your opinion, and how much of the kickouts have been coached, or is Cluxton just saying to the boys, move and I'll find you?
Yeah, well, I'll go to the rotational sweeper first. I think that has to be coached, because if it's ad hoc, all of a sudden nobody has responsibility, and you could have very, very, like, you could have, the lines could be blurred very quickly as who's marking, who's stepping off, why aren't we squeezing that shot, and all of a sudden that becomes that requires an awful lot of communication, I think. So I wouldn't be surprised if maybe there was 3 or 4 designated people who would have been comfortable in that position. I know myself with our own club, we probably, just to make things really simple, we would have to have, look, you're sweeping 9 times out of 10, just for role clarity, and so that probably is, I'd say that's something that's been worked on fairly religiously in training, and probably, as Mark said, since the Derry game, I think, I didn't expect it, but I think Dublin swallowed the ego a little bit and said, we probably can't go for a shootout. And I thought that was it was a big call, because I think Kerry felt that they could out football Dublin, and Dublin said, well, the ghost of Jim McGuinness 2011 is still around, and they went full counter-attack mode, you know, and so to answer your first question, rotational sweeper I think has to be worked on. I don't think that can be done on an ad hoc nature. And secondly, it's a fairly niche position as well, because it's not just a case of standing in a space. It's kind of preempting the first ball, or it's preempting where the run is going to be made, rather than reacting to where the run is made, you know. So I'd say that had to be worked on fairly religiously. And the second one, look, I know there was lots of talk. We kind of expected a Clifford and a Con, kind of who shows up, that's who wins. Neither of them showed up, ironically. But from my point of view, and I know I'm probably a small bit biased just because I know him fairly well, but the battle lines were drawn, I think, by Cluxton in the first half. The stepping up to hit the free, like, I'd say he's hit 1,000 frees since he's came back, just over and over again. And I know his two knees are in pretty bad state, like. To be able to get enough practice to just stroke those two frees over on the biggest occasion was phenomenal. And then picking apart the Kerry press, like Kerry did press, Mark said they did press, and they probably, I don't think they fully committed to it. I think they kind of were a little bit watery in their press. I thought the back line, they had a 4 at the back of the press. I thought that was a bit disconnected from the intermediate line. I thought Brian Howard he got 35% of all kickouts. I thought he managed to get himself in little pockets in between the two lines. And in fairness to Cluxton, a lot of that is just his striking of the ball is phenomenal. And I know he gets sick when lads give out about short kickouts, because he'd be annoyed that these aren't easy, like, and we play our 6th years versus teachers soccer match sometimes some years, and like the strike on him is phenomenal. Like his let's say his soccer ability is outrageous, and you could see that he's putting it into little pockets that are really hard to defend. And you could see the Kerry press getting more and more frustrated. It was like a little air balloon, and every time he got a kick out away when Kerry had a squeeze on, Kerry got more and more deflated. And to be honest, like going in 6-4 at half time, I was thinking, Jesus, Dublin are going to be over the moon. They've dismantled the Kerry press. They've defended like dogs. They've played all the football. Clifford was relatively quiet. And then when the goal went in, I was thinking, Christ, that could be game over for Dublin, because that was such a mental hit, because they had done everything right, and Clifford still managed to find that pass, and they went in a point down. So look, I think the kick out laid the kick out in the first half laid the groundwork for Kerry having no platform, because the whole second half Kerry dropped off. So when Kerry needed to chase that game, they couldn't, because they were into this in the second half. They were into this dropping to the 45, but it was only taking Dublin 2 kick passes to get down the far side of the field. So they were neither dropping off nor pressing, and it looked quite shoddy a little bit, to be honest, from the second half from Kerry's press, and they weren't able to get any energy or any kind of pressure on Dublin at all. So look, I suppose if you give Dublin a kind of a sniff of a chance going into the last 10 minutes, they are the best conditioned team in the country by a country mile. And you look at, as we alluded to already, the subs are bring Jack McCaffrey. I mean, he had a direct hand in 3 scores, a couple of frees and a ball in for Paddy Small. Like 7-2 in the last 15 minutes or whatever it was. I mean, that kind of tells its own story. So look, I think the groundwork for that win was laid in the first half by a phenomenal counter-attack display and a really, really good kick-out display from Cluxton.
Yeah, and Mark, that was brilliant, Daniel. And Mark, from your own perspective there too, like, you know, from Kerry, like Kerry, you talked about Kerry getting those footholds, you know, the 3-point lead, then Dublin clawed it back with a mistake, then they got 3 again. They still dropped off a lot of kickouts, Mark. Like, was that maybe too cautious an approach, or you know, was it because they were 3 up and they thought, look, have what we hold and we'll play the game now in our terms? Was there an element of that as well?
Yeah, I would say Daniel hit maybe because of this, they never won any kickouts. I think, maybe I'm correct me if I'm wrong, Dublin won every single their own kickouts, didn't they?
100%.
Yeah, 23 out of 23. Yeah.
Yep. So look, maybe there was part of that. They went 3 up and they went, well, look, we're not going to overcommit in case we get caught again on the goal. Now, I was actually surprised. I thought, when you think back to the Derry game, when Kerry were in really trouble, when Kerry were in trouble, they went in a serious press, you know, and I didn't see any of that. I ended up that really aggressive press. Now, I said the press up, yes, the press, but as you say, it was a watery press. Like again, Derry, sorry, Kerry went in a real aggressive press. They didn't do that. Now, and maybe this is, I do think Dublin were physically stronger than Kerry. You know, that Brian Fenton and them, I just thought that, not saying that was maybe a reason it didn't go in the press, I don't know. But it definitely, we'll never know the answer to that. Was Kerry thinking, right, we haven't really pressed the kick out that much aggressive, but we're still winning by 3. And you know yourself, after the goal, to be fair to Kerry, you were waiting for that blue wave to come once Dublin got the game back to draw. And to be fair to Kerry, I thought the first 2 or 3 minutes you could see they've obviously game scenarios to talk about this. We're going to kill the ball here. We're going to hold the ball and work our scores. And they go and kick the next 3 points where you thought, yes, they've killed momentum. But Dublin did it their tails up. And I do think Jack McCaffrey coming on at the time did lift Dublin players again. And Dublin wrestled back momentum. And you know yourself, when you lose that momentum, like at the start, Kerry after half time had all the momentum. Gavin White's loose pass, ball in the net. Before you thought Dublin had momentum, Kerry wrestled it back, and then Dublin wrestled it back again. And it's very hard when you have momentum and lose it to get it back again. Like, it just shows, we talk about the fine margins. Like I was reading the book. I remember I was reading the book there. I was on holidays, and just about Olympic gold, about the Olympics, and this man was talking about. It was actually a runner from USA. I forget his name, but he says like Olympic gold medals are won by a split second. And if you think, even when Dublin were a point up right at the end, I forget who it was, should have slipped the ball, was blocked. Was it Michael Burns made a brilliant block from somebody. The second ball, you'd have thought, made a brilliant block. Kerry man dived on it, and you thought Kerry's going to get a chance to go up the field here and get the equaliser. But Dublin it was that second phase play where they got 3 men swarm, turned the ball over, and they end up Dean Rock at the free. And that was it. It was over with. Maybe you're telling me fine margin. Michael Burns could have made the block. Another referee may give a free, because sometimes they done it 3 men around, will give a free out, and he might have let Kerry go, but it's just that fine margin. But look, Dublin, to answer your question, Dublin, I thought, deserved to win, but look, Kerry probably were a wee bit cautious. There was nowhere near the aggressive they had against Derry.
Yeah. I just think the connection there, just towards the end there, Mark, and what you're saying there, just the connection, I think was just going on us there a wee bit, but we heard most of that. I would probably tend to agree with these lads that I thought, because for me, Daniel, Kerry were the original team who went after Cluxton. If you think back to, in 2016, probably, I think it was 2015, sorry, I think it was the 2015 final. And, Kerry really decided we're going after him here now. And then I think there was another game, Daniel, where Cluxton found Brian Hard. I don't really remember that one. And then McCaffrey took off and they got a goal in the break. And maybe there was an element of fear. Do you think there was a small element of fear that Kerry didn't want to go completely gung-ho? But Shane Ryan did come out in the first half and try and block off that favourite channel, the Cluxton that he likes to kick across his body to the right-hand side, obviously. And Ryan did block that channel off. But was there a small element of fear, do you think?
Well, there's 2 things there. I think Cluxton has lost about 10 or 15 yards from what he had, to be honest. I think definitely his knees have kind of caused him problems. And I think the back of Kerry's press was too far away. He was never going to be able to get over that. And I thought there was a big gap between their intermediate line and the back line of their press. So that was issue 1. So like Shane Ryan couldn't actually impact play. Like they were too far back to really get after it. The other thing then is, I think Cluxton psychologically has a thing with Kerry and Kerry teams. Like, I mean, he seems to be a fascinating character for them, because he's the one that they're always talking about. You ever talk to a Kerry person and you say you're from Dublin, they'll talk about Cluxton. I think he gets into their heads a small little bit, and they were definitely spooked from that first half. I think they really were. And look, partially, as you mentioned, 2016, that was one of the best presses I've ever seen of Cluxton ever. Yeah. And I think Kerry got 2 goals just before half time, or 2 goals and a point, something like that. But Cluxton came back out and had 100% after half time. I think all those scar tissues, if David O'Hanlon is playing or if Evan Comfort, both goalkeepers in their own right, I think Kerry showed that no respect whatsoever. And they really go after it. I think Cluxton has kind of an air of respect from a lot of teams that kind of forced them into, as we said, like a bit of a watery press. Like I think it was just a massive turning point in the game overall, because Kerry could never get that stranglehold of, as we said, when Joe McQuinnell gave the dodgy free against Derry when they got kick out. Kerry could never get that on Dublin. They could never get that. And just one other key point we mentioned, Jack McCaffrey's timing. He was due to come in just before the goal was scored. So Jack McCaffrey coming in 3 points down and Jack McCaffrey coming in with a level game is a very, very different, like that's a small margin, because again, it'll be kind of widely known up here, Jack Mack's unbelievable attacking wing back, but maybe a structural defender wouldn't be the best in the world. So it's very different kind of Dublin chasing the game as opposed to allowing him to be on that front foot, you know. So it looks very fine margins, but I think Dublin just the last 10 or 15 minutes, that experience, the James McCarthy's, the Fentons, the Kilkennys, the know-how of those lads really showed, you know.
Yeah, very good. And Mark, one thing I noticed about Dublin in particular, you know, they talk about this bunch and break. Dublin were very good at bunching and breaking, particularly in the second half on kickouts, and Cluxton was obviously finding a lot of kickouts, but they actually retained the bunch and break centrally down the field, and that allowed then for the next pass, Mark, to be a kick pass into the channel, which then allowed the third phase of that possession to be another kick pass, you know. And that was one thing that I really thought was a standout feature of Dublin in how they move the ball with a foot as well. Is that something that caught your eye?
Yeah, it wasn't. To be fair, I actually thought for a time in the middle of the second half, you're actually saying Dublin's actually beating Kerry, playing the Kerry way when they have the ball, that double kick, where Kerry were struggling to get back and Dublin were able to break into pace. But I do think that there's one, Pat Gilroy, I think, has a massive influence over that Dublin team.
Yeah.
Just even as you think back when they first made the breakthrough, it was a bunch. But you even think the swarm tackle, it's been a long time as I've seen Dublin's tackling as aggressive in that swarm cluster tackle. And the last time it's been Pat Gilroy, but there's no doubt Pat Gilroy had brought that to the table. Just with that, because that's the two things he had worked fiercely on when he first came in, was the bunch and then it was also when they lost the ball, that swarm tackle and turnover count, and it was Dublin were really good at it. But you have to remember, look, Dublin, obviously this was a game this was their game, because you have to remember Kerry beat them last year by a point. They got Stephen Sluxton back, they got Condon playing that game, they did Jack McCaffrey, Paul Mannion, them boys came back, obviously Pat Gilroy, but like we mentioned there, even Paul Mannion I thought was brilliant. You talk about clutch moments, big players coming up with big scores. Every time Dublin needed a score, it was Paul Mannion. Paul Mannion was the boy coming up with the big scores. Yeah. And like Con, he didn't score. Like Con was poor, didn't score. No, he hit the crossbar. And it was, I thought Paul Mannion was superb for Dublin.
Yeah. No, he was outstanding. And maybe Daniel, just finishing that with the top of Paul Mannion. Maybe there was an element of freshness about Paul Mannion in comparison to Shane Walsh. You know, Shane Walsh obviously during the year looked stale and tired and had a long year with Kilmacud. People forget that Mannion has probably missed the most of Kilmacud's last two campaigns, hasn't he? So he probably come in this year probably extra hungry.
Yeah, definitely. Hopefully he's stale and tired now for next Saturday week for the Classic Championship. And
he'll still be drunk. He's still drunk, is he? He'll still be drunk.
Hopefully. No, there's definitely a bit of truth in that, and I thought his comments afterwards were interesting. You know, he talked about like he couldn't stand by being fit and watch what the Dublin lads were going through. You know, there was a lot of interesting comments, I think, in the post-match stuff, you know, and maybe he had a couple of points on board, so lads are a little bit looser, but I think definitely there's something in that. I thought Mannion got better and better as the year went on and kind of culminated in the performance on Sunday. But it's amazing though, like what I will give to Dublin, right, and this is kind of the big compliment I can give them. If you said at the start of the day that James McCarthy will be very quiet, if you said Con will be very quiet, Costello will be whipped off, Kilkenny was grand without doing anything spectacular, Paddy Small wasn't too bad. Like if we said all of that to you, you'd be thinking, Jesus, no way are they going to be in this game. But it was I thought it was a real victory for the collective from Dublin's point of view, you know, and it was but yeah, Mannion's overall performance, it's funny that what did he get, 4 or 5 points, something like that? Clifford got something similar. Yeah, Clifford got something similar, but he hit a few wides, and Mannion had a man of the match performance. Clifford didn't. You know, it's amazing the narrative that can surround it. But all being said, I thought Mannion was top class, to be fair to him.
And Mark, I have to give it to you, boy. You've called this from early doors, boy. I think you called Dublin from early doors, didn't you?
Don't then change my mind right before the final.
Doesn't count.
I just remember that day. I remember that night Clare pit. I don't know it was in the National League, but I just remember their warm up. And look, this was before, and I just remember Cluxton wasn't back then, and Paul Mannion wasn't back then. No, Paul Mannion was back, but he was injured. He wasn't playing. But I just remember that night, just watching their bench, and I remember they brought on. How was it brought on? They brought Dean Rock, they brought Jack McCaffrey, they brought Owen Merchant, and who else? Niall Scully on against there with 15 minutes left. And I just
you were actually 6 points up.
Seven up with 15. 50. But I just remember Jack McCaffrey. It was just relentless. And even like there was only 20 odd thousand, but I remember the lift it gave the Dublin crowd. But even then, you see, that was one thing I was really impressed with Dublin that night, was that bunch tackling again. I hadn't seen it since in 3 or 4 years. That swarm tackling where they nearly put you down a channel and there was 3 or 4 men just congested on you. But look, to be fair, the Dubs.
Lads, what about one we can ask you? Yeah.
No, I was just saying it's
ahead.
interesting. It was an interesting comment because I think that there was a definite change in Dublin. I think halfway through the year, like, and I was just looking at something we were talking about matchups and we were talking about like Kerry 9 times out of 10 get the ball to Clifford in the scoring area and he will be the one to take the shot. And I was looking at his first score, Mark mentioned, and Mick Fitch was left on his own and Lee Gannon was kind of defending, looking out towards the 45, had an opportunity to double, but you could see the second that the score went over, Mick Fitch went over and he absolutely bollocked Lee Gannon out of it for not coming in for the double up and just marking space. I think there was definitely a change in how I think Dublin went very kind of man-to-man-ish for the early part of the year and clearly wasn't suiting them. But I think there was a definite sea change, and whether that's Gilroy, Cluxton, whoever it was, definitely the nature, that swarm tackle has 100% came back into their game in for the last maybe 2 or 3 months, definitely.
What about Desi's style of management? Is it a Dublin thing where, you know, there has to be an element of control and calm? Never ever, Mark, does he ever seem to be agitated or flustered, you know? And let's be honest, even the likes of Kerry, you see Jack O'Connor getting flustered with linesmen, referees, you know, everyone does it at certain stages, but there seems to be an element of real control about it. Is it just because of the quality he has around him, the communication he has? Well, what is that? Because Jim Gavin obviously brought that level of control and maybe the players need that element of control.
Yeah, look, that's actually an interesting point. I don't, to answer your question, I don't know, but you've actually made a good point. And even when Pat Gilroy was there, like I remember reading, was it one of the, I think it was Bernard Brogan's book when Peter Caffrey was there. The first thing it said, it was a wee bit erratic sometimes. And if you remember Mayo went and warmed up in the hill, and Peter came in and hit John Morrison and he had a big shoulder and all hit. It was like a bit of a carnival. And I remember reading Bernard Brogan's book, a bit about it was that came in was when Pat Gilroy came in, the bullshit stopped along the lane. It was composed, no more standing in front of the hill.
Right, okay.
White boots, no more tight haircuts, no more white strapping. And I think he laid a load of the groundworks, and then Jim Gavin brought it to another level. And maybe Desi Ford has seen, look, this all works. And look, he is very calm on the line, but it was actually, look, just listening to some of the Dublin players, and you'd hear stuff last year, certain players weren't happy with Farrell and this here, but after the game on Sunday, you see how much the players actually like Desi Farrell. Just
of course,
like like we done it for Desi, the abuse he got his last couple of years, and I think James McCarthy actually summed it up right. He says, look, his last 2 years we're beaten two of that. We're beaten the Ireland semi-final after extra time. We're beat by Kerry the next year by a point. We're not that far away, but the abuse that Desi Ford took was outrageous. And James McCarthy says he actually carried himself really, really well. And look, we owe this to Desi Ford, and I'm delighted for him. It just shows you how much Desi Ford liked the players, because there was rumours you would have heard last year, there's certain boys don't like him, and he's not Jim Gavin, he's this. And then when you hear the players refreshing on Sunday, back into the help. But look, that calmness along the line does help. Now, you're probably in that bracket too. You've that calmness along the line. So maybe you, Desi Ford, and Jim Gavin or something. All for what is it?
Believe it or not, I actually have like really calmed along the line. Like Daniel will be able to tell you that. But I see when you were describing the white boots, the fancy haircuts, and the white tape, I just seen Ledger playing at centre half back with shirt on. You know what I mean? That's what I could see. But Doran, I asked Ledger to go out and warm up on the same side as Dublin in 2017, and he gave it the big bravado in the chase and say, "I lead them out. I'll fucking lead them out." And sure, here he came out and seen them, and then just turned the other way for fuck's sake. Like.
I thought I said no sound bites tonight. No.
Here, listen. On a serious note, Daniel. You know, from a manager's style, you know, you can talk about the style and that and how they conduct themselves, but it's interesting that they never go out of house. Like, it's interesting that every manager is always a dub, you know, and I don't think that's ever going to change, is it really?
No, I don't think so. Now, look, in fairness, there's the amount of intellectual property in Dublin football is fairly significant. Like, and you, they might be in house, but I can guarantee you, there's a generation below us from the country somewhere. So, look, just because of urbanization, all the rest of it, like they do have a phenomenal pick of people. Like, and you go around to Dublin clubs even, and the amount of the amount of in-house club managers, it would be fairly significant. And a lot of these guys go from under 14s, 16s, minors. They tend to follow the whole way up, but you can be sure, like, if there's a deficiency in a manager somewhere, they wouldn't be too long about surrounding them with the right people. You know, I think that's probably what he's done. Like, because look, you know, history is written by the victors, and if Dublin lose on Sunday, I wonder if the narrative is different, you know. But like bringing Gilroy in, I think was, I don't know whether it was Desi's move or county board move or what it was, but it was probably a sign that all wasn't perfect, you know. As I said, I can't comment on the socially what the players think of him, but it was definitely a point in direction that something needed to be done. And I still think bringing Cluxton back, while it was 100% the right decision, it still doesn't spread confidence in Evan Comfort, David O'Hanlon, any other young keeper in the county. And look, that, as I said, that's why winning is so important. That doesn't become an issue. Whereas if they lose, all of a sudden, you know, why are you doing this? You know, and look, it'll be interesting. The next couple of years will be interesting, because I'd say you could lose, like, I think Rock, McCarthy, I'd imagine Cluxton, like there could be 4 or 5 will drop off that panel, and all of a sudden Dublin come back to the pack very quickly without those boys, you know. So again, it'll be interesting. Does someone new take it up? Does Desi say, I've got as much as I can get out of this group? I don't know. It'll be interesting.
Yeah. No, I think hats off to Desi now, because I think I actually penned a piece this week for the Gaelic Life, and I did say that, you know, after being relegated last year by Monaghan and losing the semi-final, you know, to Kerry, there was a massive pressure on him, massive pressure, you know, and those high-profile players walking away. Lads, listen, brilliant stuff. Look, we'll finish very quickly with a few wee sort of favorite moments of the year. For me, I'm looking at 3 things. I'm looking at favorite player, favorite moment, and favorite game. Ledge, favorite player this year?
Favorite player, do you know what? I'd probably have to give it to Gareth McKinless. I thought he was absolutely outrageous this year. I think he's a really, really top quality footballer, and he's like that first half, and then for a good bit of the second half till he got injured. That display against Kerry, I thought was absolutely top class. I know Mark mightn't like me giving him a bit of an ego here before the Derry Championship, but I thought he was spectacular for the year.
Yeah. And again, we're not talking about player of the year. We're just talking about our favorite player of the year. Mark, I suppose mine obviously was the club you're managing at the minute, Shane McGuigan. I've been singing Shane's praises from day one. But what about yourself then? Who was your favorite player of the year, Mark?
My favourite player of the year, now, to be fair, look, he actually made a mistake in the All-Ireland final. I'm just getting an up close look. I remember watching the McGrath Cup game, and then I remember watching him in the Munster final and just going, how is that man so quick with a ball? And it was Gavin White. He was my favourite player watching this year. To be fair, like, of all the players that happened, and I remember we talked to Paddy about him a few times, and Paddy says, you want to see this training? Like, I've never seen this man like just with a ball, and he takes off. And I remember that day in the Munster finals there, everybody's after, says, Jesus, Gavin White just couldn't get near him when he took off. And he was my favourite player.
Remember actually Davy Burke, I think Davy Burke was talking about Kerry on a podcast, and he actually singled him out for, he couldn't believe the line breaking ability of him and the pace of him, you know, from
but it's actually it was, you say there was 2 men in front, the way he broke the line with a ball, just the power, it's like we talk about ways with pace, but it was also the pace and power to break a line with a ball. No, like, as if it was just no problem to him. He was just, it was, you seeing him up close and you're going, oh.
Yeah. Ledge, favourite moment of the year? Any standout moments?
It's probably something from the club championship. I said the 2 Cliffords winning that junior or the club championship with Fossa. I think that was a nice moment. I know their mother passed away later on in the year, but I thought that was a really it was just a nice thing, and it was probably more linked to GA than kind of maybe an All-Ireland final in a way. Like, that was pure parish, and it was a wild sort of a game. It was an entertaining game first, but I just thought
you're very much an anti-Nordy man. You don't like the Northerners, so you'd be delighted to see Stewartstown beaten as well, wouldn't you? Like,
I didn't even know who they're playing in the final, but come here, I must mention his speech afterwards as well. What did he say? I don't know who refereed it, but it was an awful decision to send me off. I was like, oh Jesus,
That's right.
But that was pure. There was an amateurism about that whole day. That was class. You know, it was really enjoyable.
Mark, favorite moment?
That's a tough one. Favorite moment.
I have to say now. Mine was New York winning that Connacht game. I thought it was brilliant. I thought that was class. You know, New York beating Leitrim in Celtic or in Gaelic Park.
That was all the coaching you did over there, was it?
What's that?
That was all the coaching you went over there last year.
Well,
doing the
I was
groundwork
I was thinking, I took them about 4 or 5 years ago, so I was looking at the panel, and those boys are starting to come through now. Yeah.
I'll tell you, my favourite moment, and it wasn't actually, it was actually just saying, Derry played Monaghan in Celtic Park. It was in the first qualifier. Remember, after Derry had beat them by, and I just remember before the game, the atmosphere was electric. I thought it was just brilliant, and that was, and even that whole game that Saturday night, it said Celtic Park was packed.
That's right.
Thereafter, and the atmosphere was unreal in it. And to be fair, I would say that was my favourite moment of the whole.
Is there something to be said then? Is there something to be said, boys, before we go on to our last couple of questions? Is there something to be said for games being played at smaller venues, Ledge?
Without a doubt. I actually think that was the best atmosphere I've been at this year.
Yeah. Crow Park, Daniel, gets very soulless, doesn't it? Quarterfinal stages, doesn't it?
That's horrendous, and I know people say the diameters are the same and all the rest of it, but a lot of the time it doesn't lend itself to high intensity games. You know, you might get the odd one like Dublin Kerry the weekend, but you pack out a town, and what it does for a town economically as well is phenomenal. Like, you know, I'd be much quicker going somewhere down the country for a big game than Croke Park sometimes.
I've been in Clonus, Tony, as you have many's a day, when there's been no game on, and those people must be fucking delighted to get games in Clonus, you know.
Yeah, I'm sure they also find the atmosphere, but I just that day in Celtic Park, I think there was 16, so it was packed there, and there always Colin Collins was with me, and I remember at the time Colin just was the atmosphere. This before the game, this is an hour before the game. The atmosphere, and to be fair, the Derry County Board did music and all. I don't know what was on, some tiddly dee or tiddle, but it was just I just remember that was my favourite. Even and then the game made the moment before the game, the atmosphere was brilliant. The whole game in itself was brilliant. I just think that was my favorite. It was my favorite moment of the year.
So does that count then for the next question? Then for you, favorite game? Was that your favorite game?
No, favorite game would definitely be Derry and Kerry.
Very interesting, Ledge.
Park that day.
I'll satisfy your Ulsterness here now, and I'll probably say Monaghan and Armagh penalty shootout. Like that was. Not necessarily for I was class. The drama was insane. Like, you know, it was top end. Like poor all our mass in the stuck of all these the whole time.
Yeah, I thought looking back, I thought the Ulster final was brilliant too. You know, look, the quality of the Ulster final at times was poor, but a lot of mistakes. But I think the drama, you know, the whole Gallagher cloud hanging over the final. You had obviously then as well McGeeney looking to win his first trophy in 9 years, going to penalty shootout. McFall, the hero, you know, and him coming back after having a few troubles himself. So there was an awful lot of subplots in that final, like, you know, and I thought
McGeeney must be the luckiest manager in Ireland.
Yeah.
I've seen his record the other day.
Donny, you know yourself, like you listen to Aidan Falker, you listen to players, you know, that are really well respected within that group, and they all love him. He's created a really high performance environment, and I think he's doing really, really well with the players he has at his disposal. And look, Donny, to be honest with you, when you look at the last four this year, Kerry, Dublin, Monaghan, and Derry, like Armagh's probably not a million miles behind Monaghan, you know, and Derry. They're probably just in that sort of top 8, top 6 bracket, you know.
Yeah, you're going back to that fine margins,
fine margins.
And we talk about that half a second, you win an Olympic gold medal in a half a second. Whereas that fine margin, like, I was just in the Armagh's, right? Like last year beat by Galway on penalties. Yeah. This year beat by Derry in an Ulster final on penalties. To be knocked out in the quarterfinals by
I'll give you an example. Like I'm a huge United fan, as you know, like a Man United fan. Alex Ferguson joined Man United in 1986. Right, he had 4 years, no trophies, a lot of failures, close to relegation. The jury was out. They wanted him out. You know, the vultures were circling. Mark Robbins. A winner against Notts Forest in the last couple of minutes. They won an FA Cup game. They ended up scrambling through an FA Cup final, went to a replay, dropped his keeper, won the replay, still didn't win a league for another 2 seasons. And Steve Bruce scored those 2 goals in the 94th and 97th minute that got them over the line against Sheffield Wednesday. And the rest is history. The greatest manager ever. You know, and it's those wee small little margins, you know, that it takes. Like, but listen, lads, I'm going to leave it on that, right? I'm just going to put you on the spot here really quickly. Footballer of the year, Daniel. Don't do a Flinto now and go in a few things tonight and stick it on Twitter. So tell us here now who your footballer of the year is.
Well, I think first of all, can I just stay it on the record? I think it's an awful lot of bollocksology because it's an opinion and all the rest of it, right? It is.
It is.
But Clifford, yes, was fantastic and all the rest of it. I thought James McCarthy was really good. Maybe not, let's say, putting together, let's say, all the skills and all the talent and all the rest. But I think that man has a drive and a want in him that very few do. And like even last year when Dublin were in the shit, he stuck it out and he nearly brought him back into that Kerry game on his own. Like I think he had a phenomenal year, and I'd say it'll probably be his last. But I thought he was outrageous.
Yeah, Mark.
I know people thought David Clifford. I know he had a poor enough final, but we were saying he had a poor enough final. He kicked 3 or 4 points, but what he's done this year,
yeah,
even some of the points, his kicks going, it's just he's like I call he's a Messi or Ronaldo of Gaelic football, and just I think he's been football of the year again. And I've no doubt I don't know where you get it, but that's who I vote would be with David Clifford.
Yeah. It's a very subjective thing, I suppose, and it creates a lot of it's a lot of barstool talk. And you know, I'm sure if Clifford does win it, I'm sure he would swap it for a Celtic Cross. I'm sure, you know. But listen, lads,
who's your football of the year?
What's that?
Who's yours?
Well, I was trying to make a case for Shane McGuigan from the point of view being, and hear me out in this, I was trying to make a case for being the influence that he's had, the quality of games that he's played, the volume of games that he's played, the intensity of the games in comparison to Leinster and Munster. And then on top of that, I seen Derry 3 times in the National League live this year, and once in RD where there was no TV cameras, on a tight field, on a heavy pitch, against a blanket defence, and some of the scores he kicked were outrageous. But the problem you have, lads, is it's sort of, and you would know this, lads, yourself, Football of the Year is not based on 2023 January to July. It's based on the last 3 or 4 games. And it's an unfortunate thing, because in my opinion, it should be, you know, who's been the foreign players from the start of the year, who's carried that consistency throughout the year. It should be based over the course of a longer season, rather than who's been in an All-Ireland final and who's been the sentiment vote or the standout candidate. But look, certainly he
did finish top scorer. He's actually top scorer. He's 100%. Finished top scorer this year.
Look, I don't think we would disagree in saying that McCarthy and Daniel, probably Cluxton as well, has crept into that bracket now with his performances over the last few weeks. You know, and
if you look at it rather than but just look at it from influence point of view, like I mean, you'd talk about importance, like I mean, and that's a whole different bracket. We could have it like the Go Games. We could have most skillful, we could have fastest, we could have most influential, we could have them all, sir. Give everyone a prize.
Well, I was invited to a presentation evening one night in a club, and I'll not say who, and there was 16 in the panel, and I think there was 14 awards handed out. It was unbelievable. I felt sorry for the
awards last year.
I felt sorry for the 2 wee boys that didn't get the awards. lads, on behalf of Daily Sports Science, and on behalf of obviously all the coaches that are in the Daily group, you know, would like to thank you. Absolutely invaluable contributions from both of you. You know, it's been brilliant and really, really enjoyable, and hopefully maybe later in the winter months, we've all had successful club seasons, and we can chat in the latter stages of the provincial club campaigns. But listen, lads, thanks very much, and all the very best for your seasons, man.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mark.